The forest was merciless tonight. The air was sharp with winter's bite, so cold it sliced against her skin, as if the night itself wanted her gone. Every breath she took came out in quick bursts of fog, trembling clouds that gave away her position to whatever was hunting her. She pressed forward anyway, lungs burning, legs screaming, heart pounding so violently it drowned out every other sound. Branches tore at her arms, clawed at her clothes, snapped against her face as though the trees themselves had joined the hunt. She stumbled over roots hidden under the blanket of dead leaves, but she didn't dare stop. Stopping meant capture. Capture meant death. The ground was uneven, slick with frost, and the storm above mirrored her chaos. Clouds churned, swallowing the moonlight in heavy shadows. The sky seemed alive, restless, as if it too carried her fear. A low growl of thunder rolled through the distance, and with it came the reminder she wasn't alone. They were closing in. A sharp crack echoed behind her, a branch breaking under weight too heavy to belong to a deer. Then another. Footsteps, deliberate and fast. She didn't need to glance back to know glowing eyes were locked on her spine. The wolves had her scent. They would not stop. Her ankle gave way as she tripped over a jagged rock, and she fell hard, skin scraping against the frozen earth. Pain lanced through her leg, sharp and hot, and she bit down a cry. Her mouth filled with the taste of iron, blood. She wiped it quickly, but the copper tang lingered. She forced herself up, ignoring the flare of agony, and limped forward with what strength she had left. The night pressed in tighter, suffocating her with silence between the chases, broken only by the snap of twigs and the distant howl of something inhuman. Each howl sliced deeper into her chest, because she knew they weren't just hunting. They were calling each other, closing the circle. Her chest ached, her thoughts spiraled. Why me? Why tonight? She had been careful. She had stayed away from the borderlands, hidden her face in the crowded villages, kept her secret buried so deep no one could pry it out. But secrets had a way of clawing their way back to the surface, and hers burned too bright to stay hidden forever. Her breath shook as she remembered that night, the night everything fell apart. A flash of fire, screams. The smell of singed fur and burning skin. The way they looked at her, not with pity, not even with anger, with fear. Fear so raw it carved her name into whispers she could never escape. Monster, cursed, dangerous. She had begged them to understand, to believe she hadn't meant it, but no one wanted the truth. No one wanted to believe she wasn't the threat they imagined. Exiled, cast out, alone. And yet, here she was, hunted again. Because no matter how far she ran, her bloodline betrayed her. No matter how much she tried to suppress it, the power inside her surged like a storm waiting to break. She felt it now, sparking under her skin, crawling up her veins, begging to be unleashed. A dangerous promise, a reminder she could never outrun herself. Her heart hammered faster as the sound of pursuit drew nearer. Heavy paws thudded against the ground, leaves scattered in a rush of motion. She could almost feel their hot breath on her neck, the growl vibrating in her bones. Her body screamed at her to give in, to release the storm within, but she clenched her fists and pushed it back. Not yet. If she gave in now, she wouldn't just burn her hunters, she'd burn herself too. The trees thinned, and the forest opened into a stretch of frozen clearing, bathed in silver light. She froze for a breath, exposed, vulnerable, her pulse echoing like a war drum in her ears. There was nowhere left to hide. Her eyes darted around the clearing, desperate. Her chest rose and fell, ragged. The howls were closer now, circling her like wolves around a wounded deer. She whispered into the emptiness, voice raw, "Not like this, please not like this." But the night gave no answer. Only silence, broken by the crunch of snow as the first shadow emerged from the trees. Eyes glowing amber, teeth bared in a cruel grin. Another followed, then another, a ring of predators tightening around her. Their growls rumbled, hungry and certain. Her legs trembled, her pulse thundered. She was cornered, breathless, heartbroken, furious at the fate that kept dragging her back into chaos. And yet, deep inside, something stirred. That power, that dangerous fire, coiled tight in her chest, like it had been waiting for this very moment. Her hands shook with the effort of holding it back. Her vision blurred with heat she knew wasn't just fear. It terrified her, but it also tempted her. Would she burn them? Would she burn herself? Would she become exactly what they feared she was? The ring of wolves pressed closer, and she let out one shaky, defiant breath. The storm inside her whispered, "You were never prey." And if you want to know how her story unfolds, if you want to see whether she survives this night or loses herself to the fire within, then you're exactly where you need to be. Stay, listen, breathe with her, because this is just the beginning. And if you're new here, subscribe to Clarissa Romance Collections, where every tale burns brighter, deeper, and closer to the heart. This story will take you places you won't want to leave. The clearing was silent, but for her own ragged breath, the circle of predators closing in. Their eyes glowed with hunger, yellow and unblinking, reflections of the moon that hung pale and thin above the storm clouds. She knew the sound of their growls by heart, the kind that rose not from their throats, but from their bones, the kind that meant they weren't here to chase her for sport, they were here to finish her. Her pulse stuttered, but then the storm shifted, the air changed. A ripple of pressure swept across the clearing, subtle at first, then undeniable, like the forest itself had drawn in a sharp breath. The wolves faltered. Their growls turned uncertain. Something moved in the shadows beyond the trees. A presence, heavy, steady, unyielding. She lifted her head, chest heaving, vision blurred with cold and fear, and then she saw him. At first, just a shadow cutting through the mist, tall and deliberate, shoulders squared as though he carried the weight of the storm itself. He moved with no urgency, no wasted motion, and yet every step sent a pulse through the ground, a warning the earth itself seemed to heed. The wolves backed away, not far but enough for her to notice. Their hackles rose, their ears flattened. Then his eyes appeared, gold burning brighter than the moonlight, fierce enough to silence the clearing. The forest bowed to him. She could feel it in the way the wind stilled, the way the branches no longer clawed at her, the way the night itself seemed to pause. Her chest tightened. She didn't know his name, she didn't know his intent, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty: this was no ordinary man, this was power walking on two legs. The first wolf lunged, breaking the silence. A flash of fur, a snarl like tearing metal, and then he moved. She almost missed it. The speed was so unnatural. 1 second, the wolf was mid-air, claws extended, jaws open wide. The next, the stranger's hand gripped its throat, twisting with brutal precision. A sickening crack split the night, and the beast dissolved into smoke, its snarl cut short. Another came from the left, low and fast. He pivoted, caught it mid-leap, and slammed it into the earth so hard the ground itself shook. The impact sent a shock wave that knocked frost from the branches. She staggered back, heart hammering, watching as he moved through the circle like a storm-given flesh. There was no wasted strength, no hesitation. His strikes were lethal, his movements calculated, as if each wolf was nothing more than an obstacle between breaths. Claws raked across his arms, but his flesh knitted as quickly as it was torn. Fangs snapped inches from his throat, but his grip broke jaws before they closed. Smoke rose around him as each fallen beast evaporated into nothingness, and still he stood tall, broad chest rising and falling in steady rhythm, muscles coiled like restrained violence. She couldn't look away. Terror clawed at her, but it tangled with something else, something deeper, sharper, harder to name. Every strike he landed sent a shiver through her. Not fear, not entirely, something dangerously close to awe. The last wolf hesitated, pacing at the edge of the clearing, its growl low, uncertain. Its eyes flicked between her and him, as though calculating which fate was worse. He didn't give it a choice. With a sudden burst, he closed the distance faster than the wolf could react. His hand caught its muzzle, forcing it back with raw strength. For a heartbeat, their growls clashed in a guttural echo, and then his golden eyes burned brighter, bright enough that even she had to look away. The wolf whimpered, collapsed into shadow, and vanished like the others. The silence that followed was deafening. The clearing was littered with nothing but fading mist, cold and damp against her skin. The storm above seemed to settle, as though it too recognized the shift in dominance. He stood at the center of it all, unmarked, unbroken, gold eyes fixed on her. Her body tensed, her instinct screamed to run, but her legs refused. She was caught between the remnants of terror and the pull of something she didn't understand. He took a step toward her, slow, deliberate, as though wary of spooking her further. Yet even his careful movements carried weight, like the ground bent slightly under his presence. She tried to speak, but her throat was raw, her lips trembling too hard to form words. And then he said her name. Not a question, not a guess, a certainty. The sound of it in his voice froze her blood. It wasn't spoken like a stranger's discovery, but like an intimate truth he had carried long before this night. Her name had never sounded like that before. Heavy, respected, possessed. She swallowed hard, unable to look away from him. Her pulse thundered too loud in her own ears. How do you know me? She managed, her voice thin, breaking at the edges. His gaze didn't waver. I always have. The words struck something deep in her chest, something she couldn't name. Every part of her screamed to distrust him, to see him as nothing more than another threat in a life that had known too many. And yet, her body betrayed her. Her hands shook, not with fear now, but with something she didn't want to admit. The burn in her veins from running, from fighting, changed into heat curling low in her stomach. He stepped closer, the air between them thickened, charged like the moment before lightning strikes. His scent reached her, earth rain, and something darker, sharper, uniquely his. It wrapped around her senses until she almost forgot the pain in her ankle, the sting of her wounds, the blood still drying on her lip. She hated the way her chest tightened for him, hated the way her eyes lingered on the line of his jaw, the raw strength in his shoulders, the dangerous beauty of his gaze. Was he her savior or her next captor? She didn't know. And that uncertainty was its own kind of terror, but she couldn't deny it. When he looked at her, she didn't feel like prey anymore. She felt seen, and it terrified her more than the wolves ever had. Her chest still heaved from the chase, from the terror of wolves and the storm that had nearly broken her, yet none of that roared as loud as the silence that stretched now between her and him. His golden eyes lingered on her, steady, unwavering, as if daring her to breathe, daring her to remember who she was beneath the trembling, beneath the fear. And against her will, she did remember. The memories pressed in without mercy, dragging her backward through time, forcing her to face the wounds that never healed. She was a child again, no older than 8, crouched at the edge of the riverbank where her pack's children played. They skipped stones across the surface, laughter ringing like silver bells. She wanted to join them, wanted to feel that ease, that belonging, but she knew she wasn't like them. She had tried to stay invisible, to tuck her strange moments away where no one could see, the way her skin sometimes shimmered when the moonlight kissed it, the way heat pooled in her palms when her emotions ran too high. She had promised herself she would never let it show. But promises made by children are fragile things. The boy had pushed her first. She remembered the sting of mud against her cheek, the laughter that followed, sharp and cruel. Something inside her had snapped then, a soundless cry of shame and rage. Her palms had burned. White silver light erupted from her hands before she could stop it, flaring like fire made of starlight. The boy screamed, not because he was burned, no, the flame hadn't touched him, but because everyone had seen. Every child froze, every laugh died, and then the whispers began. Monster, witch, not one of us. She had stumbled back, terrified of herself, desperate to make it stop, her hands glowing against her will. And when the adults came running, their faces twisted in the same fear. Even her father hadn't looked at her then. He had looked past her as though she wasn't his child at all. That was the first time she heard it spoken in hushed voices as she walked past, cursed. And she had carried that name ever since. The forest faded around her now, her body still trembling under his gaze, but the past dragged her deeper. She was older, standing in the pack's council hall. The torches on the walls flickered, shadows stretching across angry faces. She remembered the weight of every stare, the sharp scent of distrust rolling off them. She remembered clutching her mother's hand so tightly her fingers went numb. Her power had grown harder to hide, Too many accidents, too many near misses, a rabbit scorched alive when she tried to hold it, a hunting spear melting to slag in her hands. They hadn't seen a girl learning control, they had seen a threat. The council's voices overlapped, accusations, demands. She will doom us. She will bring ruin. She should never have been born. Her mother stood tall, shielding her with trembling arms, her voice breaking as she begged them to reconsider. But her father had remained silent, jaw set, eyes refusing to meet hers. The verdict had been swift: exile. They had dragged her out into the night, their torches lighting the path of her shame. She had begged, cried, screamed that she would do better, that she could control it. But no one listened. To them, she was already lost. Her mother had been the only one to slip free from the crowd, rushing to her side at the border. She pressed trembling hands against her daughter's face, tears glistening in her eyes. "My fire," she whispered, voice breaking, "do not let them convince you it is a curse." Those were her last words before they tore her away, before the border slammed shut behind her, before the night swallowed her whole. The echo of that night never left, not even now. Her breaths came shallow as the memory loosened, leaving her in the present once more, her body rigid, her soul raw. The Alpha still stood before her, golden eyes unrelenting, as though he could see every memory carved into her skin, and perhaps he could. Perhaps that was why his gaze unsettled her so deeply, because she feared he knew. She closed her eyes for a moment, and the fire returned. Not the kind that burned wood or flesh. No, this was the strange silver flame that had haunted her since birth. She felt it coil under her skin, flickering at her fingertips, begging to be freed. She curled her hands into fists, desperate to smother it, but still it pulsed, faintly glowing through the cracks between her fingers. The light painted the clearing in soft silver, ghostly and beautiful, and she hated it. Because this fire had stolen everything from her. Her home, her family, her chance at belonging. It had marked her, isolated her, condemned her, and yet, despite everything, it remained, waiting, watching, whispering in a language older than her own heartbeat. She opened her eyes, breath trembling, and found his gaze fixed, not on her wounds, not on her fear, but on her hands, on the silver flame bleeding through her clenched fists. He did not flinch, he did not recoil, and that terrified her most of all. She remembered every other face that had looked upon her flame, twisted in fear, warped with revulsion, dripping with hatred. But his eyes held none of those things. They held recognition, curiosity, something far more dangerous. Her throat tightened. Did he know what she was? Did he understand the weight of what burned inside her? And if he did, why hadn't he turned away? She wanted to demand answers, to spit out every question, clawing at her tongue, but the words tangled in her chest. Instead, she stood there in the clearing, her pulse racing, her past crashing against her present, and her fire whispering promises she no longer trusted. She wanted to believe her mother's words, that it wasn't a curse, that it could be something more. But all she had ever known was loss. And the thought that this stranger, this Alpha with golden eyes, might see her differently was almost unbearable. Because hope, she had learned, was the most dangerous fire of all. The storm had thinned, leaving behind a silence so profound it felt deliberate, as though the forest itself held its breath. She followed him through the darkness, each step reluctant, every nerve taut with suspicion. The Alpha's stride was unerring, as if some invisible thread pulled him forward, guiding him through the tangled undergrowth. Then the trees parted. A clearing opened before them, bathed in moonlight so pure it looked unnatural. The ground shimmered faintly, damp grass catching silver light like a sea of stars scattered at their feet. The trees that circled the grove were impossibly tall, their trunks carved with patterns that glowed faintly, pulsing as though alive. Each line, each rune, throbbed in rhythm with her own heartbeat. Her breath hitched. The air here was different, heavier, older. It pressed against her skin, seeped into her lungs, coiled around her fire. She felt it before she understood it. The place was sacred, ancient, waiting. She froze at the threshold, fear anchoring her where she stood. But he turned back, golden eyes catching the moonlight, steady, commanding. Without words, he urged her forward. Her body obeyed even as her mind resisted. She stepped into the grove and the world shifted. The air hummed, vibrating like the plucked string of some celestial instrument. The glowing carvings along the trees brightened, casting the grove in a pale radiance that reached into her bones. She lifted a trembling hand, and the silver flame at her fingertips flickered brighter, unbidden. It answered the grove, and the grove answered back. Then came the visions. It began as a flicker at the edge of her sight, a flash of fire across the bark of a tree. She blinked, and suddenly she wasn't standing in the grove anymore. She was somewhere else, someone else. A great hall stretched before her, its stone walls dripping with banners, its throne high and cold. She saw herself there, not as she was, mud-streaked and trembling, but crowned in silver fire, her shoulders straight, her eyes burning, wolves kneeling in a ring around her. Not just wolves, alphas, warriors, entire packs bent low as if before a sovereign. Her chest tightened, breath ragged, but the vision did not release her. It shifted, twisting, unraveling into ruin. The hall burned. Wolves howled in anguish. The same fire that crowned her now consumed her, spilling from her hands, devouring stone and flesh alike. And at the center of the destruction, her face, eyes wild, expression unrecognizable. She tore her gaze away, clutching her head, trying to force the visions back into silence, but they came in waves, each heavier than the last. A forest collapsing under a blood-red moon, rivers turning to ash, children crying out her name, some in reverence, others in terror. She stumbled, falling to her knees on the damp grass of the grove, her fingers digging into the soil, as though she could anchor herself there in the present, away from the storm of what could be. "I can't," she whispered, voice breaking. "That's not me." Her words were desperate, a plea to the grove itself, to the visions, to anyone listening, but they sounded hollow, even to her ears. The alpha stepped closer, his shadow falling over her, his presence filling every space the visions had torn open. "It always was," he said, voice low, unwavering. The weight of his words pressed into her chest, heavier than any exile, any judgment she had carried before. She shook her head violently, nails biting into her palms. "No, I'm not her. I'm not that thing. You saw what I saw." His tone was not cruel, not accusing, but steady, certain. "The grove doesn't lie." Her laugh came broken, bitter. "The grove doesn't know me. It doesn't know what I have done. It doesn't know the fire. It destroys, it takes, it saves." He cut in sharply, golden eyes blazing. "You think your power stole everything from you. But what if it was given for what's coming?" She froze, the words sinking in like hooks. Her fire pulsed beneath her skin, restless, almost eager, as though it too heard his words and hungered for their truth. But she remembered the boy's scream, the council's verdict, the night her mother's tears burned against her cheek. How could destiny be anything but a lie when all it had ever brought her was loss? The carvings along the trees pulsed brighter, as though disagreeing with her, as though mocking her denial. A low hum rose, weaving through the grove, vibrating in her bones. It was not sound, but something older, something that spoke directly to the marrow. Her vision blurred again. She saw herself standing on a battlefield beneath a blood moon, her flame not destroying but shielding, an entire pack protected within a barrier of silver fire. Wolves pressed close, not recoiling from her touch, but reaching for it, depending on it, trusting it. Her throat tightened. This vision felt different. Not ruin, not coronation, something fragile, balanced on the edge of both. She gasped, yanking herself back, chest heaving as she dragged air into her lungs. The alpha had not moved. He stood over her, unyielding, his expression unreadable, but his eyes, those golden eyes, burned with something she could not name. Not pity, not fear, conviction. "You don't choose the fire," he said softly, almost like a vow, "but you choose what it becomes." Her body trembled, torn between recoil and surrender. The grove's hum grew louder, the carvings blazing so bright they painted the clearing in silver daylight. She felt the flame inside her answering, rising, filling every fracture in her soul with its insistent call. She wanted to scream, she wanted to run, she wanted to believe, but most of all, she wanted to know if This prophecy was hers. If this destiny had always been waiting, why him? Why was this alpha here pulling her into it when the rest of the world had only ever cast her aside? Her voice came raw, shaking. Why are you showing me this? Why me? The silence between them stretched, taut as a bowstring, until finally he spoke. Because you are the fire they feared, he said, his tone quiet but edged with steel, and the fire this world will need. Her heart thundered against her ribs, the weight of his words colliding with the grove's unrelenting pull, with the vision still echoing behind her eyes. For the first time, she realized she wasn't terrified of the fire consuming her. She was terrified of what would happen if she accepted it. The grove's hum had just begun to fade, the light along the carved trees dimming into a steady pulse, when the silence broke. It wasn't the wind, it wasn't the forest breathing, it was footsteps. Dozens, heavy, coordinated. She stiffened, her body already taut from the visions, and the alpha's head snapped toward the sound before she could even form the thought. His golden eyes narrowed, the faint glow in them sharpening into a blade of warning. Then the shadows surged. Figures poured into the grove from every direction, the circle of sacred trees trembling with their intrusion. Wolves, dozens of them, shifting as they entered, fur bristling under the moonlight, their eyes locked not on the alpha but on her. Their growls reverberated through the clearing, filling the air with the promise of violence. Her chest constricted. She felt the flame inside her flare in response, silver light licking at her veins, begging to be released. She forced it down, her nails digging crescent moons into her palms. The alpha stepped forward, placing himself between her and them, shoulders squared, presence like a wall. His growl thundered through the grove, deeper and older than the rest, the kind that carried command, the kind that demanded obedience. But the rival pack did not bow. The largest of them, scarred across the jaw, eyes like fractured glass, stepped ahead of the others. His gaze landed on her, burning with fury and fear entwined. She does not belong here, he snarled, voice raw. You know what she is. You know what she brings. Murmurs rippled through the others, low growls of agreement, words hissed between teeth, cursed, dangerous, doom. Her knees trembled, but not from weakness, from rage, from the weight of recognition. She had heard these words before, whispered in the alleys of her exile, shouted across the borders she was chased from. Every repetition cut deeper. The alpha did not move. His voice came steady, lethal. She is under my protection. A chorus of growls rose. The scarred wolf's lips curled back. Then you doom yourself with her. His voice sharpened, loud enough to shake the leaves above. Do you not see the visions? The fire will consume us all. She will not save us. She will end us. The grove seemed to recoil at his words, the faint glow along the carved trees faltering, flickering like candlelight under a storm. Her breath caught. Her heart pounded against her ribs. She wanted to scream back, to claw the words from his mouth, but her throat locked. Fear and fury tangled, strangling her voice. Then the alpha moved. It was a blur. His body shifted mid-stride, bones cracking, fur rippling into place, his golden eyes blazing brighter than any torch. His wolf form was massive, towering, every muscle coiled in raw violence. His snarl ripped through the grove like thunder. And then chaos erupted. The rival wolves lunged, snarls tore the night apart, bodies colliding with the weight of falling trees. The sound of teeth snapping against bone echoed, mingling with the thud of flesh striking earth. She stumbled backward, pressed against the glowing bark of one of the sacred trees, her breath ragged as the fight unfolded before her. The alpha tore through them with brutal precision, each strike deliberate, each movement fueled by a rage that felt more than territorial, it felt personal. His claws ripped into fur, his jaws snapped bone. The air reeked of blood and sweat and primal violence, but they kept coming. The scarred wolf shifted mid-leap, his human form slamming into the alpha's flank with bone-crushing force. The impact cracked like lightning. Both hit the ground hard, rolling in a snarl of teeth and fists. Others circled her, eyes gleaming, teeth bared. Her flame pulsed, frantic, desperate to break free. It surged up her arms, flickering at her fingertips, silver light spilling into the night. She clenched her fists, biting back a scream, forcing it down. If she let go here, if she unleashed it, there would be nothing left of grove or pack. Her body shook with the effort, her lungs burned, but she held it. The alpha roared, his voice carrying both human and wolf tones, a guttural sound that ripped the night apart. He broke free, throwing the scarred wolf into the dirt with a sickening thud. His golden eyes locked on her for the briefest second, fierce and commanding, as if daring her not to surrender to the fire. She nodded without realizing, trembling but resolute. The fight raged. Wolves fell. The ground grew slick with blood. The sacred grove shuddered under the violence, its glowing runes sputtering, dimming as though the very magic here recoiled from the brutality staining it. And then, abruptly, silence. The scarred wolf staggered to his feet, blood dripping from his jaw, eyes burning with unbroken hatred. He spat into the dirt, his words venom. You protect her now, but she will burn you. She will burn us all. He turned, snarling at the others, and though some hesitated, most followed, retreating into the shadows with low growls and backward glances filled with malice. The grove was littered with their dead, their wounded. The survivors carried their bitterness with them, their accusations lingering in the air long after their bodies vanished into the trees. The alpha shifted back, his chest heaving, blood streaking his skin, his eyes still glowing faintly, turned to her. Her body sagged with exhaustion, her fire still thrumming beneath the surface, begging for release. She looked at him, at the wolf who had fought for her, who had shielded her, who had not once wavered. But before either could speak, a voice rose among the wounded, low, broken, but loud enough to carry. She cannot stay. Others joined, ragged but insistent. She is cursed. She is danger. You endanger us all. Their words cut sharper than claws, slicing through the fragile bond of the grove. The alpha's jaw tightened, his fists clenched, but the weight of his own pack's voices pressed against him. He turned to her, his gaze heavy, torn. You need to go. His voice was rough, breaking around the edges. Her throat closed, the words carved into her like knives, though she saw the war in his eyes. He didn't want this, he was being forced into it. Still, it didn't soften the blow. Her lips parted, but no words came. Only silence, thick with everything she wanted to scream and couldn't. He stepped closer, his hand lifting as if to touch her, to say the things his voice couldn't, but he stopped short, fingers trembling in the air between them. The grove's hum faded entirely, the night pressed in, and then separation. She turned, forcing her legs to move, forcing her lungs to draw breath, forcing herself not to collapse under the weight of his gaze burning into her back. Each step away from him felt like tearing open a wound that would never close. But she didn't look back. Not even when she felt his eyes linger too long, as though he was willing her to turn, to stay, to defy them all. Not even when she felt her fire tremble, restless, yearning, aching for him. The night had swallowed her whole after the grove, but he followed. She hadn't heard his steps at first, too lost in the taste of exile cutting her open again, too consumed by the echo of the accusations. Yet when her legs gave out and she stumbled through the thick trees, he was suddenly there, an arm beneath her, steady, refusing to let her fall. He didn't speak. He simply guided her, his hand firm at her elbow, his golden eyes unreadable in the fractured light of the moon. When at last the storm eased and the forest opened into a cleft of stone, he led her inside. The cave swallowed them in shadows, but its walls breathed warmth, old and sheltering, a cocoon against the bitter winds outside. A fire bloomed in moments, its crackle breaking the silence. Sparks rose toward the ceiling like fleeting stars, painting his sharp jawline in flickering amber. He knelt near her, his movements deliberate, precise, as if every motion was a promise. She tried to resist. She shifted away when his hand reached for her torn arm, the blood crusting along the jagged cut. But his touch, his touch was not what she expected. It wasn't harsh. It wasn't claiming. It was gentle, warm, patient. His thumb brushed her skin with care, his palm steady as though he carried no doubt in what he was doing. Her breath hitched. A part of her wanted to push him away, to wrap her wounds in secrecy, to protect herself from this strange tenderness. But another part, the part that had been starved of touch, of kindness, of someone who didn't recoil, leaned into it. Against her will, warmth spread through her veins, chasing away the chill of exile. The silence thickened between them, not heavy but fragile, like glass. Every crackle of the fire seemed to stretch the thread that tethered them. Finally, his voice broke it, low, roughened by something more than exhaustion. You bleed too easily for someone who has walked alone this long. Her lips parted, a bitter laugh clawing its way up her throat. You think I had a choice? He met her gaze then, golden eyes softened by firelight, shadows gathering around the edges. No, I think the world never gave you one. Her throat tightened. She wanted to argue, to deny the weight of his words, but the truth of them pressed too deeply against her chest, and so she said nothing. He shifted closer, the firelight catching the scar that carved across his ribs, a pale reminder of battles past. For the first time, she saw him not as the untouchable alpha, not as the golden-eyed savior who cleaved through enemies with his claws, but as a man scarred, wounded human in his way. His hand stilled against her arm. You should know, he murmured, his voice no longer steady but trembling at the edges. I wasn't born a king. I wasn't even born with a place to stand. The words spilled from him, slow, deliberate, as though each one carved something out of him. He told her of nights spent as the weakest in his pack, of blows he could not return, of silence pressed against his ribs as he lay awake, waiting for dawn. He told her of betrayal, of brothers lost to ambition, of the moment his father's hand shoved him into the dirt with the command never to rise again. And still he rose. Her chest ached as he spoke, every word a revelation, every confession a reminder that even the strongest bore scars. He wasn't made of stone. He was carved from pain, from choices no child should have made. She didn't mean to speak. The words tumbled out before she could stop them, whispered like a secret she had sworn never to tell. My fire killed him. The air stilled. Her hands shook as she clenched them in her lap, nails biting her palms. She hadn't spoken of it aloud, not since that night, not since the memory carved itself into her bones. She told him of the boy at the river, the cruel laughter, the power flaring, too fast, too bright. She told him how the flame had surged uncontrolled, how it had touched not just the air, but the one who had pushed her, how his screams had split the night. She had begged for help, begged them to save him, but no one had come. The boy's eyes had burned with fear until they closed forever. Her voice broke. They were right to call me cursed. The silence that followed was unbearable. She wanted him to recoil. She wanted him to name her monster, to confirm what the world had always whispered. At least then the ache would be familiar. But he didn't set. Instead, he leaned closer, his forehead nearly brushing hers, his golden eyes locked on the storm in her own. I see you, he whispered, voice like velvet wrapped around a growl, all of you, and still, I do not turn away. Her breath shuddered. The fire crackled. The distance between them dissolved. His hand lingered at her jaw, thumb grazing the curve of her cheek. Their lips hovered close, so close the heat of his breath mingled with hers, so close her pulse roared in her ears louder than the fire. Every instinct screamed at her to pull back, to protect herself, to guard the fragile walls she had built. But the gravity between them was stronger. Her lips parted, his breath brushed against her skin. The world stilled in that suspended heartbeat, two souls balanced on the edge of something neither could name. And then he whispered it again, softer, steadier, as if sealing the truth into her bones. I see you. Her eyes closed, her heart opened. The kiss never came, not fully. Their lips lingered in that unbearable closeness, trembling, suspended in a promise that tasted like fire and eternity. And in that fragile, burning moment, she realized something terrifying. She wanted him. Not as savior, not as alpha, not as the one who fought her battles. She wanted him because for the first time in her life, someone had looked at her, truly looked, and had not seen a curse. The dawn never came gently in the Valley of Wolves. It broke sharp, like a blade dragged across the horizon, the sky bleeding from violet into the harsh brilliance of morning. The cave still smelled of smoke, still hummed with the echo of almost words, almost touches. Her pulse carried fragments of last night's closeness, and though the fire had burned to ash, its warmth still lingered on her skin where his hands had once been. But outside, the world waited, and the world had teeth. They returned to the heart of the pack when the sun stood high, its light exposing everything they had hidden in the dark. She walked beside him, her steps steady, though her chest still ached from the truths she had spilled. His hand brushed hers once, barely a graze, but it was enough to remind her that she was not entirely alone. Not yet. The council had gathered. Stone walls ringed the circle, carved with symbols older than memory, older than kings. The air thickened as she entered, eyes pressing against her from every side. Suspicion, fear, loathing. The elders' voices cut through the silence, layered like blades drawn from sheets. Do you know who you bring into our halls? She is marked. The scent clings to her. She carries it, the curse. She felt the ground tilt beneath her. The words were knives, every syllable aimed at the hollow in her chest she had tried so long to protect. He stepped forward, golden eyes flashing. You speak with no proof. The eldest, his hair white as bone, rose from his seat. His gaze fell upon her, sharp, unrelenting. Proof? His voice thundered. Shall we speak of the night her flames scorched our borders? Shall we speak of the silver fire the earth itself recoiled from? You cannot blind us, boy. She is no stray. She is the cursed child the seers spoke of. The world seemed to fall silent, the words tearing through her like claws. Cursed child. The name she thought buried, the truth she thought drowned in shadows. Gasps rippled through the circle. Wolves stepped back as if the air around her had grown poisonous. The whispers swelled, voices hissing like venom. Monster, outcast, banish her. End this before it spreads. Her chest heaved, every instinct screamed at her to run, to claw her way free of this pit of snarling mouths. But she stood rooted, her body trembling, her heart breaking open in front of them all. She turned to him, the only anchor left. For a heartbeat, she believed. She believed in the golden eyes that had seen her scars and had not turned away. She believed in the warmth of his touch, the promise whispered in the dark, I see you. But now he stood frozen, his jaw tightened, his hands clenched at his sides. His gaze met hers, and in it she found not rejection, not cruelty, but hesitation. It was enough. Her lungs burned. The pack's voices rose to a roar, every syllable pounding against her like a hammer. Exile her! She will bring ruin. She carries death in her blood. Her nails bit into her palms, her heart cracking with every shouted demand. She wanted him to speak, to silence them with the weight of his authority, to shield her as he had in the forest. But he said nothing. His silence was worse than their hatred. Something inside her snapped. The air shifted, trembling with heat. The ground beneath her feet split in hairline cracks, smoke curling upward, her veins ignited, fire spilling into her chest, silver flames clawing against her skin. They recoiled, but it was too late. The power she had buried for years surged free, no longer begging for restraint, no longer asking for forgiveness. Silver fire erupted from her hands, swallowing the circle in a blinding light. Wolves cried out, stumbling back, their snarls drowned by the roar of flames that rose higher than the walls. The fire licked the sky, silver and searing, tearing through banners, scorching stone, turning shadows into ash. She screamed not from rage, but from heartbreak. Every lick of fire was her pain made flesh, every crack of burning stone, the sound of her heart fracturing. They called her cursed, so she became their curse. Through the inferno, she saw him, his golden eyes still fixed on her, not with fear, not even with hatred, but with something far worse. Regret. The fire rose higher, wolves scattered, the council cowered. The night itself seemed to recoil from the silver inferno she had unleashed. And in the center of it all, she stood, heart in ruins, flames licking her skin like a crown of fire. The flames did not die with the council's retreat. They clung to her skin, silver veins of fire winding up her arms, lighting her eyes like twin storms. The world she had once feared was no longer her prison. It bowed, it cracked, it trembled beneath her steps. When the night returned, she did not hide. She came back to them, storm and fury, wrapped in mortal flesh. Her hair whipped in the wind, her body ringed in silver light. Every step burned a mark into the earth. Wolves who had spat curses days before now froze where they stood, ears flattened, throats bared, as though some primal memory in their blood warned them they were prey. The pack's murmurs scattered like dry leaves in the wind. Impossible! She should be ash. She returned, but she was not the same girl they banished in fear. She carried herself with a power older than their hatred, a fire born not of curse, but of defiance. She did not crawl, she did not beg. She entered the circle where they had judged her and stood taller than their carved thrones, taller than the shadow of their ancient laws. Her voice cut through their disbelief like thunder. I am not your sacrifice. The earth shook as she spoke, the sound rumbling through stone, through roots, through marrow. Wolves stumbled back, their growls dying in their throats, not from obedience but awe. And then the sky answered. Lightning tore it open, white fissures cracking across the heavens. Clouds split as though ripped by invisible claws, pouring silver light over her crown of flames. The world itself seemed to kneel. And still they whispered, she cannot be allowed to live. She will undo us. She is the end. But their words broke when the forest itself shifted. Branches bent toward her, leaves shivered in reverence. The wind howled her name as though it had always known it. She did not look at them. She looked at him, the one who had hesitated, the one whose silence still carved deeper than their accusations. His golden eyes burned as if torn between fear and something far sharper, far hungrier. And then the true enemy came. From the shadows beyond the grove, where moonlight never touched, emerged a presence heavier than stone, darker than midnight, a rival king, not wolf, not man, something more. His form rippled, shoulders broad, teeth bared, eyes like molten black. He carried the weight of conquest in every step, the kind of hunger that devoured not only land but souls. He had been waiting for this moment, waiting for her. So the cursed child lives, he snarled, voice carrying across the grove like the growl of thunder itself. You were meant to burn before you could rise. They should have finished it when you were still a whisper. The wolves dropped their gazes, their fear turning toward him now, their bodies caught between two forces that dwarfed them. Her flames flared higher. For the first time, she did not flinch at their hunger, at their judgment. She did not shrink from the name they spat like venom. I was never cursed, she said, her words steady, searing. You wanted me broken. You wanted me to believe your lies. But I am not your sacrifice. The rival king's laughter split the air, low and sharp. He lunged, the ground splitting beneath his stride. She did not retreat. The clash was not of flesh and bone alone. It was storm against storm. His shadows writhed like serpents, striking, coiling, dragging the light down. Her flames rose to meet them, silver fire biting through the darkness, scorching every inch it touched. Each strike was an earthquake, each roar a shattering of centuries-old silence. Trees splintered, rock shattered, the very sky warped under the force of their battle. Wolves scattered to the edges of the grove, too terrified to intervene, too spellbound to look away. He towered, his claws slicing through the air, aiming for her heart. But she met him head-on, her power no longer timid, no longer trembling. Silver fire bled from her fingertips, coiling into spears, shields, waves that scorched his shadows into ash. Still, he pressed on. You are mine to destroy, he thundered. Your fire belongs to me. Her chest heaved, but her eyes did not break from his. Through the smoke, through the chaos, through the roar of power colliding, she shouted words that tore free from the marrow of her bones. My fire belongs to no one. The grove erupted, the earth convulsed, the sky cracked, and every wolf dropped to their knees. Not from command, not from fear, but because nature itself forced them down. The rival king's shadow flickered, torn by the silver inferno pouring from her body. His howl rattled the air as her flames wrapped around him, consuming, erasing. He fought, but the fire did not waver. She did not waver. The night burned brighter than day, her body glowing like a star reborn on earth. And when at last his form shattered into smoke and embers, when the darkness he carried fled into nothing, silence fell heavy over the grove. Every gaze turned to her, the cursed child, the exile, the girl they had named Monster. She stood crowned in silver fire, her breath steady, her eyes sharper than steel. And when she spoke, the world listened. I am not your curse, I am your reckoning. The wind bowed, the flames curled, the wolves bent lower, foreheads pressed to the earth, not in defiance, not in hatred, in surrender. The grove still smoked, ash drifted like snow, catching in her hair, clinging to her lashes, painting her in the gray remains of a world she had burned. Wolves knelt, but not one dared lift their gaze. Silence pressed heavy, broken only by the faint crackle of dying embers and the echo of her last words, I am your reckoning. Yet even in triumph, a question hung in the air, sharp and unspoken. Was she savior or destroyer? The wolves did not know. Their hearts pounded as they looked at her, silver fire still whispering across her skin like living armor. She had slain a king, yes. She had torn shadow from flesh and silenced the dark. But in doing so, had she not proven the prophecy true? Had she not become everything they feared? One glance from her eyes could command their obedience. One flare of her flame could reduce them to ash. What is the line between salvation and devastation when the power in your blood can burn both? And you listening now, what would you have done? Would you have bowed, forehead pressed to the earth, and prayed she would be merciful? Would you have run, clawing your way into the dark to escape the light that scorched too bright? Or would you have stood with her shoulder to shoulder, flames at your side, knowing that to follow her meant risking everything? Because she was not just one of them. She was something greater, something untamed, and with that came danger as much as hope. Her gaze lifted, scanning the faces around her. They trembled under her silence, and then her eyes found him. The Lycan who had hesitated, the golden-eyed king who had watched her break, who had failed her with silence, but still carried her heart in the marrow of his bones. His chest rose and fell, his body torn between reverence and fear. She wondered what he saw now. Did he see the girl he had touched tenderly by the fire, her secrets spilling into his hands like fragile glass? Or did he see a weapon, untouchable, unstoppable, born not for love but for war? And what do you see? When you close your eyes and picture her standing there, crowned in fire, would you call her queen or curse? Would you dare to love her, knowing her power could consume you whole? Or would you turn away, convincing yourself it was safer to live without her than to burn at her side? The night trembled with the weight of those questions. No elder, no prophecy, no pack law could answer them. Only choice. Hers, his, and maybe even yours. So I will ask you here and now, heart to heart, if you stood in that grove, ash clinging to your skin, her fire burning your breath from your lungs, would you have reached for her hand? Would you have whispered, I choose you, even knowing it could mean your end? Or would you have stepped back into the crowd, one more voice among the fearful, condemning what you did not understand? The truth is, stories like hers are never simple. They cut us open, lay bare what we fear most: power, love, betrayal, redemption. And they leave us with the one question we can never escape. What would you do? Would you choose her side? If your heart aches with that question, if you felt the fire in her voice, the hunger in her soul, if even for a moment you wondered whether you'd bow or rise beside her, then don't let the story end here. There are more nights, more battles, more kisses stolen at the edge of war. And if you want to hear them, every heartbeat, every shiver, every flame, then subscribe to Clarissa Romance Collections, where every tale burns brighter than the last, because the fire isn't set finished. And neither are you. The grove lay in ruins, charred earth smoldered, the scent of ash and blood clinging thick to the air. Broken trees leaned like wounded sentinels, their branches scorched black against the pale breath of moonlight. Wolves lingered in silence, watching, waiting, not daring to move too close to her. And in the center of it all, she stood, shoulders squared, chest rising and falling, with the echo of battle still in her lungs. The silver flame that had once roared now dimmed, flickering only faintly at her fingertips like the dying glow of a storm retreating into the horizon. Beside her, The Alpha, scarred, bloodied, his golden eyes dimmed by exhaustion but never straying from her face. He stood not as king, not as savior, but as man, broken and still unbowed. Together they looked upon the ruin of what had been a battlefield and what might become a kingdom. Neither spoke, words felt fragile here, too weak to hold the weight of what had happened, too hollow to carry the truth of what had changed. The wolves stirred, a shuffle of paws, a low whimper, the sound of a single body bowing low in the ash, and then another, and another, until the grove bent with submission, not to him, not to the crown he wore, but to her. Her breath caught, she did not move, did not lower her eyes or raise her hands. She only stood as though rooted to the earth, haunted by the knowledge that this was what prophecy had promised. And yet, in the deepest corners of her heart, a whisper coiled like smoke. Was this triumph or warning? The silence grew heavy. He turned toward her, voice raw, edged with something between reverence and fear. Yusuf changed everything. Her lips parted, but no words came. She could not say yes. She could not say no. She only breathed, tasting ash, tasting destiny, and wondering if this was the moment she had been made for, or the moment she had been cursed to endure. Then the ground trembled. It was subtle at first, a low vibration curling up through the soil, rattling stone and bone alike. The wolves stiffened, ears twitched, bodies bristled, hackles lifted. The Alpha's gaze snapped to the shadows at the grove's edge. And then a voice. It did not come from a mouth. It did not rise from any throat she could see. It rolled like thunder, ancient and cold, slithering through the smoke. She is not the only one. Every heart froze. Every breath caught in the air like shattered glass. Her own pulse faltered, struck by the weight of those words, and then hammered harder, faster, as though trying to escape her chest. She is not the only one. The voice deepened, echoing from every tree, every stone, every drop of blood soaking the ground. The true Alpha has yet to rise. Her fire flared without thought, a silver flicker breaking from her skin, casting light into the darkness. But the shadows did not retreat. They seemed to lean closer, hungry, waiting. The Alpha at her side growled low, a sound of defiance, of warning. But there was something in his eyes, something sharp and fearful, not for himself, for her. Because what did those words mean? If she was not the only one, then who else walked with her fire? Who else bore the mark of prophecy? Who else might claim a destiny she thought was hers alone? The grove did not answer. The earth only trembled once more, then stilled, leaving silence so deep it pressed against the bones of every creature present. She closed her eyes, and in the dark behind her lids she saw it again, the visions from the grove, the crown of fire, the wolves kneeling, the kingdom in ruin. But this time there was more. A second figure, shrouded, faceless, a shadow with eyes like hers, standing not behind her, not before her, but against her. Her breath hitched. The voice was gone, the trembling earth stilled, but the words did not fade. They lingered, coiled tight around her chest, sinking deep like hooks. The true Alpha has yet to rise. Her eyes opened, silver flame glinting once more, and she whispered into the broken night, almost to herself, almost to him, almost to every soul listening in silence. This isn't set over, and somewhere beyond the trees, beyond the smoke, beyond the reach of her fire, something stirred, something that promised war.